Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding. We thine unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we have in thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This honorable House now resume its sitting. Call of the roll.
Mr. Witter, Mr. Samuda, Mr. Holness, Mr. Clark, Dr. Clark, Mr. Shaw, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Darrell Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mr. Hutchinson, Mrs. Mallow Ford, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Williams, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Green, Mr. Terry Long, Mr. Main, Mr. Arscott, Mr. Azan, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Mr. Buchanan, Dr. Clark, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Pernell Charles Jr., Mr. Clark, your time now. Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Miss Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Miss Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kelly, Dr. McNeil, Miss Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redman, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Reverend Thwaites, Mrs. Vaz, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Wright.
Statements, 5 minutes.
Speaker, today promises to be an interesting day. Not strong on legislative matters, but on sectorial presentations. And we also have a matter that will be dealt with by the Minister of Finance, the production levy Act Capital Development Fund withdrawal or number 1 order. Mr. Speaker, we will not delay any further and just ask that you go down the agenda in the normal way. We have a report of the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives. Has it been delayed? We'll have to have a recommittee because it's not yet prepared. Am I correct? Yes. But that is what we will have for the day, Mr. Speaker. So you can proceed.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: Ministry Paper number 32 of 2020 and White Paper number 1 of 2020 entitled The Tourism Networks Policy and Strategy, and Ministry Paper number 32 of 2020, an annual report of the Administrator General's Department for the year 2017-2018.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motion given orally. Mr. Shmuda, indication on my document that there is a notice of motion given orally, and nobody has responded. Yeah. So we can proceed without it. Questions and answers to questions. Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without the leave of the House first obtained. Public business.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to introduce the Bauxite Production Levy Act, Capital Development Fund Withdrawal Number 1, Order 2020. Mr. Speaker, as you and my other colleagues in this Honourable House are aware, the Jamaica Bauxite Institute was established by the Government of Jamaica in 1975 as a regulatory, planning and development agency to manage the sovereign aspects of Jamaica's participation in the bauxite alumina industry. The JBI was made and is responsible for monitoring and studying the alumina industry and advising the GOJ on matters pertaining to the industry locally and internationally. Mr. Speaker, the JBI is primarily funded from levies on the bauxite industry through the Capital Development Fund, and that has always been the case. As at May 31st, 2020, the Capital Development Fund had a balance of $2,121.29 million, which was up from $1.8 billion in 2019. Mr. Speaker, the Bauxite Community Development Program was established in 1996 to undertake economic and infrastructural projects in bauxite alumina communities under the management of the JBI. Funding for this program, the Bauxite Community Development Program, is obtained from the CDF, which is used to undertake special investment in the communities affected by bauxite mining operations. Since its inception, the Bauxite Community Development Program has continued to support the social and economic development of communities adjacent to bauxite mining processing, port and rail operations, and has contributed to the enhancement of the existence of harmonious working relationship among the communities, the government, and the bauxite alumina companies. Mr. Speaker, during the 2019-20 financial year, the JBI continued to partner with key stakeholders to facilitate the delivery of 238 bauxite settlement land titles, Mr. Speaker, led by the Minister here, the Minister of Mining and Transport. In addition, the Jamaica Bauxite Institute played a key role in a number of initiatives, such as the establishment of the Water Valley Cold Storage Facility in St. Anne, vegetation approximately 60% of the Mount Rosser Mud Pond, and commencement of settlement tests on the Jamaica reserves. This community development program, its projects are intended to enhance the affected communities, primarily in the areas of agriculture, adult learning, and skills training, assistance to schools by way of equipment, the construction of classrooms and libraries, computer laboratories and sanitary facilities, road rehabilitation, and rural water and electricity extension. The projects implemented under Phase 6 of the Community Development Program were primarily in those areas: agriculture, adult learning, skills training, equipment provision to schools, construction of classrooms and libraries, computer laboratories, sanitary facilities, road rehabilitation, and rural water. Of note, this community development program facilitated the joint implementation between the JBI and the World Bank-funded Water Harvesting and Greenhouse Cluster Project. Mr. Speaker, Phase 7 of the Bauxite Community Development Program will place emphasis on the development and maintenance of educational and community facilities and amenities with a view of improving the necessary infrastructure support services. This will provide additional access to knowledge and skills required to engage in lucrative livelihood activities in keeping with the objectives of the 2030 National Development Plan. Mr. Speaker, I now propose that the withdrawal be made from the Capital Development Fund in line with the Bauxite Production Levy Act to the Jamaica Bauxite Institute as follows, as approved by Cabinet Decision 3719, dated November the 25th of 2019, and Decision 5/20, dated February 3rd of 2020, as follows: $244 million in budgetary support for the Jamaica Bauxite Institute for financial year 2020-21, and $300 million, Mr. Speaker, for Phase 7 of the Bauxite Community Development Program. Mr. Speaker, as I've articulated before, we remain committed to only withdrawing from the Capital Development Fund in line with the Bauxite Production Levy Act to facilitate the budgetary support of the JBI. The Bauxite Production Levy Act Capital Development Fund Withdrawal Number 1 Order Resolution is hereby submitted to this Honourable House for approval. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, we continue the debate, the sectoral debate, and the first presenter today is the Minister of Tourism, Honorable Edmund Bartlett. So I'll invite you to call on him to make his presentation.
Minister Bartlett.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on this the 31st occasion in this House. 31st occasion in this House, in this lower House, yes. In this Honourable House, to address at a very critical moment, I think, Mr. Speaker, in our own development and history. This important sectoral debate, as I speak of the development of challenges faced by one of our nation's key industries, tourism. And throughout, Mr. Speaker, we will have a sense, perhaps a better sense, of how critical this is and why what the government of Jamaica is doing is so important at this time. So with COVID-19 upending the affairs of every single nation, East and West, I must extend, Mr. Speaker, hearty congratulations, commendation and gratitude for the leadership of Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, as he effectively steers Jamaica through the choppiest seas in our nation's modern history. We all pray that God will continue to strengthen him in these unique times while we work as a team to deliver success at the end of this crisis. Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Almighty God, my constituents of East Central St. James, the tourism sector stakeholders, and the people of Jamaica, my dear family, Mr. Speaker, that has been with me and my bulwark over the last 46 years that I have been involved in public life, and indeed my own life as a family man. Mr. Speaker, my constituents, East Central St. James, I say thanks to you for your support and patience in my continued leadership of your affairs. The negative economic and social effects of COVID-19 are there for all to see. However, we take comfort in the range of projects resulting in improved roads, greater access to water, a deepening of community development and engagement activities, especially for our youth, housing development, urban renewal, positive development in agricultural projects, better sports development initiatives, and stronger avenues for job creation. Mr. Speaker, I salute my three councillors, my management team, and my committed workers, including Ed's Tulips, who have been a continued source of support, and particularly, Mr. Speaker, during this period of crisis, those young ladies have been across the constituency from house to house, delivering care packages and seeing to the well-being of the needy and the elderly in the constituency. As always, Mr. Speaker, the Human Capital Development Program for East Central St. James remains our flagship activity for the last 21 years. And we are proud, Mr. Speaker, that we have graduates from every university locally and many abroad, as well as high schools, teachers' colleges, and anywhere there is tertiary and other institutional development and training in Jamaica. I would like, of course, to thank all our private sector partners who have helped to make these scholarships sustainable. Mr. Speaker, I also want, of course, to thank my superb team at the Ministry of Tourism, led by our Permanent Secretary, Jennifer Griffith, and our supporting agencies, the Jamaica Tourist Board, the Tourism Enhancement Fund, the Tourism Product Development Company, Jamaica Vacations Limited, the Montego Bay Convention Center, Devon House Development Company, the Bath and Milk River Spas, as well as their respective board directors and chairpersons. The governance structure and mission of my ministry is strong, Mr. Speaker, and has allowed us to not only roll out a range of policies, programs, and initiatives that have contributed significantly to previously booming sector, but also to muscle up to deal head-on with the challenges brought on by COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, I must acknowledge your steady-handed leadership of this House and the many years of public service that you have given to Jamaica, and I declare that you remain one of the really outstanding political leaders that Jamaica has produced. I am proud of you, Mr. Speaker, for your service to this country, Jamaica. You have done a fine job. Mr. Speaker, to my colleagues on both sides of this noble House, I say thanks for the very good relations we have enjoyed over the years. Your encouragement and advice have always been graciously accepted. Now, Mr. Speaker, we are fully cognizant of the fact that we are pressed with time, and this is a very short presentation. So, Mr. Speaker, I first like to highlight the realities of COVID-19 as it made its way around the world and how it has impacted the tourism industry. Secondly, to quickly detail our stellar performance for 2019 that carried on into 2020. Thirdly, to outline our proactive moves as we continue to face the challenges of the pandemic. Fourthly, to detail major policy initiatives which are and will continue to reap success with or without COVID-19, and to give a quick synopsis of the way forward. And finally, Mr. Speaker, to affirm the fact that tourism must come back even stronger than we left it pre-COVID. Reality, Mr. Speaker, let us quickly throw in, Mr. Speaker, that as governments around the world continue to reopen economies amid the COVID-19 pandemic, tourism here and elsewhere is taking center stage, and for good reason. In Jamaica's case, the tourism industry is the nation's bread and butter. It is responsible for 9.5% of GDP, with the World Travel and Tourist Council saying that beyond that, we represent perhaps a third of the economy of Jamaica, with all the dependent industries that relate directly and indirectly to tourism. Beyond that, Mr. Speaker, it contributes some 50% of the foreign exchange earnings of the economy and generates 354,000 direct, indirect, and induced jobs. In 2019, Mr. Speaker, Jamaica welcomed approximately 4.3 million visitors, with 2.7 million stopover visitors, each spending an average of 8.6 nights, and indeed, Mr. Speaker, 1.6 million cruise visitors who contributed and spent approximately together $3.64 billion US. Stopover arrivals, Mr. Speaker, increased by some 8.4% compared to 2018, and the overall foreign exchange earning increased by a whopping 10.3%, up from $3.3 billion in 2018. The room stock in 2019 was approximately 33,000, which represented over 1,200 new rooms opened last year, Mr. Speaker, encompassing the North Coast and Kingston. In fact, Mr. Speaker, leading local and global hotel companies continue to show great interest in Jamaica. And even during this working with COVID period, our investors in new products are still showing interest in continuing in Jamaica. There are one or two who are having issues, but in the main, Mr. Speaker, those who have broken ground or those who have indicated and marked out their areas and have had approvals are still saying that they will go forward with investment in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, the more important story behind these numbers is the fact that we have been steadily repositioning tourism to ensure that there is greater local retention in the tourism revenues. When we took office, Mr. Speaker, in 2016, Jamaica was retaining 30 cents of every dollar earned in tourism. We are now retaining 40.8 cents, a 36% increase, which is among the highest in the region. Mr. Speaker, as I also believe that earnings are the most important metric of ensuring that tourism promotes national economic interests, I take great pleasure in the fact that the country has been able to increase earnings, Mr. Speaker, by $1 billion over the last 3 years. We also outpaced, Mr. Speaker, by 2,000 jobs our projection to the sector by generating last year 125,000 jobs when our projection, in fact, by generating 127,000 jobs by last year, when our projection was for 125 by 2021. At the end of 2019, Mr. Speaker, tourism was projected to create 41,000 new jobs by 2022 based on the projected increase in the number of rooms and the new markets that we have been working with. We recognize now, Mr. Speaker, that the impact of COVID-19 will result in a revision of this estimate, that is of the 41,000 new jobs. But the broader point being made is that tourism remains one of the most critical catalysts for job creation in the Jamaican economy. Just as an important note, Mr. Speaker, the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, Statin, has now classified the direct employment in the tourism sector as 170,000 workers to include employees in accommodation subsector, travel agencies, ground transportation providers, workers in the attraction subsector, craft vendors, and many others who are related directly. Mr. Speaker, the coronavirus disease of 2019 caused by the SARS-CoV-2 and first officially identified in Wuhan, China in December 2019 was of immediate concern to the Ministry of Tourism and our agencies. In January of this year, as the virus began to spread rapidly and the World Health Organization declared outbreak a public health emergency of international concern, we were already in an emergency mode. Carefully analyzing the situation on a continued basis and putting in place contingencies to treat with the growing crisis. In other words, Mr. Speaker, we didn't await the crisis to overtake us before we started the proactive work. We were also in constant dialogue with the Office of the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Health and Wellness as the situation continued to worsen, affecting first our cruise industry and later our stopover arrivals. As was anticipated, the World Health Organization in March 11, 2020 declared COVID-19 a pandemic as it swept across countries throughout the world. And I just want to point out that over 202 countries across the world had incidents of COVID-19. And that's the first time in recorded history that so many countries were impacted by a single pandemic or any disruption of any note. Tourism traffic eventually ground to a complete halt as nations across the world, including Jamaica, closed or severely restricted movements of people across borders and effectively went into shutdown mode. Our booming tourism industry, Mr. Speaker, went from thousands of arrivals per day to zero, leading to the closure of hotels, villas, attractions, widespread job losses, and a massive reduction in income for tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, craft, ground transportation providers, and a myriad of other sectors. The estimated loss of direct tourism revenue to the government due to COVID-19 from April 2020 to March 2021 is expected to be 38.4 billion Jamaican dollars. The estimated overall loss to the economy from visitor expenditure from stopover arrivals is at 107.6 billion. In short, Mr. Speaker, the nation is losing roughly $400 million per day as a result of COVID-19 and the shutdown of the tourism industry. Mr. Speaker, you can see, therefore, that the phased reopening of our borders to international travelers on June 15 is not just about tourism, but it's a matter of life and death. We need to get the over 350,000 pandemic displaced workers back to work. We need to provide some salvation to the many businesses and workers that right now are facing rough times. Mr. Speaker, I want to assure you that the reopening is being carried out safely and in a way that protects our frontline tourism workers, Jamaican citizens, and our visitors. As our Prime Minister stresses, we must continue to protect lives while securing livelihood. Mr. Speaker, our government has demonstrated consistently in focus and resolve in containing the pandemic and with excellent results to show. We are now intent and we have no desire, Mr. Speaker, to undo that tremendous work that has been done by the government so far. Mr. Speaker, this is why in April we established the COVID-19 Tourism Recovery Task Force with public-private sector collaboration consisting of key stakeholders from the tourism sector, the Ministry of Tourism, the agencies of the ministry, and several other groups, and including also the opposition spokesman on tourism and a representative that he named to the task force. It is supported by two working groups, one for general tourism and the other for cruise tourism, and a secretariat. The task force, Mr. Speaker, has been mandated to bring about a realistic view of the sector's baseline or starting position, to develop scenarios for multiple versions of the future, to establish a strategic posture the sector will have to take, as a broad direction on the journey back to growth, to establish actions and strategic imperatives that will be reflected across various scenarios, and establish trigger points to tackle action, which include a planned vision in a world that is learning to evolve rapidly. Mr. Speaker, just give me a moment to say thanks, and I really want to do that. I want to especially mention the Minister of Health, the Honorable Dr. Christopher Tufton, the CMO, the PS, and the team from the Ministry of Health who have worked hand in hand with us during this period. I want also to mention, Mr. Speaker, the Attorney General for her work in helping us to chart the paths that are required for the protocols that we establish, and indeed to establish the legal framework within which we can operate. I want to thank, and later on I will mention some other ministries, like Ministry of National Security and so on, that have been, and Ministry of Mining and Transportation. But Mr. Speaker, PricewaterhouseCoopers Senior Partner Wilfred Bagaloo, we have asked to chair the COVID-19 General Tourism Working Group and Subcommittee, and I want to give special commendation to him for the work that he has done for us. And Mr. Speaker, he has done it pro bono. Pro bono. We also brought international crisis recovery expert Jessica Shannon on board, and the COVID-19 Tourism Recovery Task Force Secretariat all came together, and we think that we were strengthened in our effort to create the country's resilience plan for the sector. Mr. Speaker, the Jamaica, the Tourism Product Development Company, along with PricewaterhouseCoopers, formulated the tourism protocols following extensive consultations with the Ministry of National Security and Foreign Affairs, as well as our local and international partners. And herein I refer to those two ministers, now Minister Chang and Minister Johnson Smith, for the tremendous work that they have done in all of this. And I also want to include Minister Matthew Samuda, for the work that they have done. And I know the Prime Minister at another time will speak of John COVID in very strong terms, but I want to make reference to that technology that is going to be a game changer for Jamaica's tourism in the future. Mr. Speaker, world-class tourism health and safety protocols are being guided by a five-point recovery strategy. 1, health and security protocols that withstand local and international scrutiny. Training all sectors to manage protocols and new behavioral patterns moving forward. Strategies around COVID security infrastructure, that's what a lot of people call the PPEs, the mask, infrared machines, etc. Communication with the local and international market about reopening, and finally, a staggered approach to reopening and managing risk in a structured way. Mr. Speaker, our protocols have received the World Travel and Tourism Safe Travel Stamp of Approval and put Jamaica as one of the 3 top countries in the world to have come with a comprehensive protocol for the opening of tourism in the world. Our protocols, Mr. Speaker, were designated based on benchmark from nearly 20 markets in the Caribbean and globally, as well as international health agencies. We covered big and small hotels, guest houses, attractions, beaches, transportation, shopping, social amenities, restaurants and bars, and the cruise ports. Mr. Speaker, the fundamental elements of the protocols related, of course, to sanitation, face masks and personal protective equipment, physical distances, clear communication and messaging, digital enablement, real-time health monitoring and reporting, rapid response, and training. Mr. Speaker, the first line of protection we have to put in place is a resilient corridor for tourism travelers and visitors. And we have defined that corridor, Mr. Speaker, as the area from Negril along the highway, starting Norman Manley Highway, all the way through to Port Antonio. And that area, Mr. Speaker, encompasses the seaward side of that highway. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, fortunately for us, as perhaps a coincidence of geography, that 85% of the tourism assets are within that corridor. and it offers an opportunity for us to manage and to do tracing and to be able to properly engage and prevent the community spread that is possible because we are keeping our visitors in an area, yes, in a specific geographical area where they are confined to enjoy all the wonderful assets that we have within that area. Mr. Speaker, the TPDCO has been charged with the responsibility of training and developing our workers. And I'm proud to say that over 20,000 tourism workers have already been trained virtually and directly by the TPDCO over the period. Mr. Speaker, our next step in the business is to assess TPDCO's ability to ensure that the compliance with the protocols that we have established are properly followed, and that we are able to police and manage it along with the Ministry of Health. Mr. Speaker, if this assessment is successful, the operators within the corridor will receive a certificate which must be displayed on property so that everyone can see that they are protocol compliant. It is important, Mr. Speaker, to recognize that the support will not stop once an assessment has been completed. Workers will receive ongoing training, and the comfort of knowing business will be monitored for ongoing compliance. Mr. Speaker, an element of protection is being prepared for emergency response. It is critical to be prepared for this risk that we may encounter, Mr. Speaker, as COVID-19 positive cases. We need to be able to respond quickly and decisively to it. Mr. Speaker, all workers will have access to an on-site trained COVID-19 safety point person and an on-site or on-call medical professional. This combination of resources will provide workers with the framework they need for quick health consultation, isolation, and testing if required. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we are in a late-stage discussion, and I want to focus a little on this for half a second. We're in a late-stage discussion with insurance and global logistics providers. And only today, the Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center developed an MOU with such international group for this discussion. And this will allow the travelers who test positive to be quickly isolated and repatriated. But beyond that, Mr. Speaker, we will provide an insurance cover so that the costs and the strain that would be on our public health system would be reduced, making sure health capacity remains consistent for our workers and our communities in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, while implementing these health and safety protocols, we are being mindful not to overshadow the heart and soul of Jamaica, which has made us such an attractive destination for locals and visitors alike. Mr. Speaker, we do not want sanitization and physical distance to create a sterile culture. We will continue to infuse our vibrancy, warmth, and culture in everything. So whilst noting, Mr. Speaker, what existing pre-COVID-19 experience may look like, we are increasing the number of flights coming into Jamaica. The preliminary data from the Jamaica Tourist Board shows that the opening of the borders on June 15 to Monday, June 22, in relation to 3,143 visitors who have entered Jamaica. A small start, but it's a start, and it has offered hope to workers that we have begun a process that will see their livelihood coming back to the fore. Mr. Speaker, our focus has not only been on safety and security, but also the financial health of the sector to assist tourism workers and businesses and mitigate the impact of COVID-19 pandemics, including, Mr. Speaker, grants through the COVID allocation of resources care. Mr. Speaker, let me take a moment now to commend the Minister of Finance, Dr. Nigel Clark, for implementing this innovative support program for the many thousands of dislocated workers across Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, the CARE program had 4 elements. The Business Employee Support and Transfer Cash, which provided temporary cash transfers to businesses in targeted sectors based on the number of workers they kept employed. The second is supporting employees with transfer of cash, the set cash, which provided temporary cash transfer to individuals where it can be verified that they lost their employment since March 10, the date, of course, when COVID-19 cases were first declared and established here due to the pandemic. Soft loans were also, soft loan fund, Mr. Speaker, is established to assist individuals and businesses that have been hit hard. And then, of course, there's the supporting the poor and vulnerable with the special Tourism 19 grants, which have gone down and have been so helpful to so many thousands of Jamaicans already. Mr. Speaker, we are in discussion with the Jamaica National Group Limited and the National Import-Export Bank, which have over $500 million. If you recall, Mr. Speaker, that the TF had put $1 billion Jamaican dollars with the Exim Bank for the purpose of supporting and enabling small and medium tourism enterprise to get affordable credit. The remnants of that, Mr. Speaker, is about $389 million that's there now, along with $200 million that we have at Jamaica National. We're putting them together, along with the program that the Minister of Finance has developed for the $1.2 billion support for small properties, small hotels, and to create a fund thereby that can allow for our small and medium tourism enterprises to have an opportunity to be able to access and to purchase and to acquire COVID security equipment and assist them in reopening during the period that we have just established for reopening. Mr. Speaker, one of the programs which we are particularly proud of, Mr. Speaker, is the Jamaica Center for Tourism Innovation. Under this initiative, Mr. Speaker, some 5,000 tourism workers have so far completed free online training. And that happened during the period when they were laid off. While we were preparing and building capacity and upscaling and increasing what we call the stackable credentials by providing certification for more than 11 courses, including a law course provided by the University of the West Indies entitled Tourism and Law, as well as language training from the university as well. The program, Mr. Speaker, was launched in April, and it has had excellent results. Mr. Speaker, it covered a whole range of disciplines: sanitation, hospitality, team leadership, certified banquet servers, certified restaurant servers, certified hospitality supervisors, and of course, Mr. Speaker, we even went and had a program for DJ certification. DJ certification. So since then, Mr. Speaker, we have gone from strength to strength, and we have seen that the program is now getting interest not only in Jamaica, but in the Caribbean and also through the UNWTO in Spain. Mr. Speaker, the work must go on. Last year, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Tourism commissioned a demand study that confirmed a high demand for local inputs in the tourism sector. It identified the need for $391.6 billion in goods from agriculture and manufacturing sector. A breakdown of this figure, Mr. Speaker, showed $352 billion for manufacturing and $39.6 billion for agriculture. As I have noted in previous presentations, Mr. Speaker, one of our strategies for plugging leakages in the tourism sector is to strengthen linkages between tourism and other productive sectors, especially manufacturing, agriculture, and of course to promote import substitution. This agenda, Mr. Speaker, is largely being executed by the Tourism Linkage Network, And over the last year, we've committed $200 million to boost the capacity of the TLN to promote the level of inclusiveness that is required by connecting the ordinary Jamaican to the tourism product and the product to the ordinary Jamaican. Mr. Speaker, we continue to envision the way forward for tourism linkages. Given that Jamaica is one of CARICOM's most prominent tourism economies, and we think about this in the context now of the post-COVID period, and indeed in the with-COVID period, because we see the need for the supply side to be built out in a stronger way, and that Jamaica can play a greater role in becoming something of a catalyst for the production and the provision of the inputs of tourism for the other countries of the Caribbean and indeed in the Americas. And so we have the vision, Mr. Speaker, that we are immediately working on, even during this with COVID period, to develop its agriculture and agro-processing potential and to make us a big hub. And we are calling it the Jamaica Tourism Supplies Logistics Hub. And through that, Mr. Speaker, not only are we going to be looking at how agriculture and manufacture can feature in that, but in terms of the human capital that we train and develop. When we certify sous chefs in Jamaica, they are now able to operate anywhere in the Caribbean and anywhere across the world. And that goes, Mr. Speaker, also for construction workers and for construction skills, as well as, Mr. Speaker, to manage the marketing arrangements and the technologies that are becoming a key part of the tourism delivery system. And we can use Jamaica as a center to be able to ensure that tourism is not just about hotels and attraction, but it is also about providing intellectual value on an export basis. Mr. Speaker, this leads us beyond now to talk about the power of digital technologies and the social revolution created by the evolution of the internet. In that vein, Mr. Speaker, the Jamaica Tourist Board has adopted new marketing strategies and a brand positioning with the tagline, Jamaica, the heartbeat of the world. And what a heartbeat we have become. This strategy, Mr. Speaker, provides the JTB with access to more tools to talk to the consumer while they consume content and make decisions. In 2019, there was a total of 1.3 trillion internet searches for travel, of which 832 million searches were for Jamaica, representing 1.5% of the global searches for tourism. This is a powerful position, Mr. Speaker, for you to operate from in a market. So, Mr. Speaker, when we move into the next element of our strategy, our worker welfare is critical and vital to us. So, Mr. Speaker, I turn to the legislative and policy agenda. Mr. Speaker, as it relates to our first-class tourism workers, in 2019, a major game changer towards improving the welfare of tourism workers was achieved when the Tourism Workers Pension Act passed through both houses of this country and received the Governor General's Assembly assent. Mr. Speaker, the Act was gazetted in January 2020, and funds to the amount of $250 million were dispersed to activate the pension scheme in March 2020. And I want to make the point that workers be not dismayed that COVID has slowed us down a little bit. Remember that this is a unique pension plan which embraces the entire sector, not just those who are working for a company, but those who are self-employed. So the craft vendor, you can now register. So the taxi driver, you can now register. So the rafter, you can now register. So the ordinary jerk pork provider can register. Everybody who offers any service in the tourism sector can become part of this pension plan. So, Mr. Speaker, we are expecting, we have already done the work. The Board of Trustees have been appointed. The investment manager and the fund managers have also been appointed. So the scheme is now fully operational, Mr. Speaker. And we expect that during the third quarter or so of this year, we will see real action emanating from this area. Mr. Speaker, I would like to indicate that the Ministry's Human Capital Development Strategy for Tourism sector and providing a basis for connectivity is the essence, Mr. Speaker, of the value added that tourism must provide to the economy. Because after we have developed and trained through the various institutions, the key elements of the tourism human factor, and that's key. It's about people. Tourism has always been about people. But people have been left behind. And this government under Andrew Holness has brought the people of Jamaica in the mainstream of tourism and provided a hope for them. And we have established the Jamaica Craft Development Institute, the Jamaica Center for Tourism Innovation. Mr. Speaker, we have trained and certified bartenders and mixologists, culinary artists and hospitality leaders. Mr. Speaker, for the first time in our history, we have brought tourism education to high schools in Jamaica and currently have 384 students who will graduate this year as associate degree in hospitality management and tourism. Mr. Speaker, what that will do is to change the labor market arrangements. Because tourism has traditionally been defined by and large as casual workers and short-term contract workers. What we are doing now is to qualify, certify, so that they can be classified and remunerated according to classification. And that's the revolution in the work market arrangement that we're talking about. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, we are partnering to go the third step, is after we train, certify and qualify, we also create a market for the artisans who are trained. And so I'm proud to say that partnering with the Port Authority, Jamaica will open in another few weeks the first ever artisan village on the Port of Falmouth for the artisans and craft traders of the tourism sector within that area. Mr. Speaker, in the process we have trained 175 craft vendors and traders so far to be able to deal with this. Mr. Speaker, I recognize that time is short, but I want to indicate that we have used the tourism linkage network through a tourism linkage policy, which we have tabled here in the House, to bring together all the key partners that operate within tourism. We've brought in the gastronomy, health and wellness, shopping, sports and entertainment and knowledge, and all the synergies, Mr. Speaker, that we have had to bring together to enable a high-class, high-quality tourism experience, so that there can be not just a sense of knowing that they exist, Mr. Speaker, but that they can be connected. And so the linkage network implemented the Agri-Linkages Exchange, the Alex platform, where local farmers, Mr. Speaker, can sell their produce to hoteliers. Mr. Speaker, the Alex platform is a collaborative effort between the Ministry of Tourism and the Linkage Network and the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fishery through RADA. The online platform was developed in 2017 to establish a bridge between sellers, the farmers, and buyers, the tourism stakeholders, to facilitate the exchange of goods. It allows the farmers across Jamaica to upload the respective produce cultivated and allow for further purchases. And Mr. Speaker, while the hotels were closed, to show the efficacy of this particular platform, while the hotels were closed, Mr. Speaker, we were able to work with RADA, and we provided 10 tablets and a number of smartphones so that the farmers in the field could now connect with the supermarkets and other produce commercial areas to continue their sale while the hotels were closed. Mr. Speaker, cruise marketing is important to us. And this is a moment when we have to sit back stop, look, and listen and pivot in relation to cruise tourism. Cruise must mean more for us. And we have established a team under Professor Shirley that is now examining, along with Joy Roberts, our Executive Director of JAMVAC, examining how cruise can become more valuable to Jamaica, how we could utilize more of the port resources that we have, how we can establish even new ports, and to have home porting arrangements in Jamaica. But more importantly, we can leverage the new Port Royal Port, which is the vision and dream of our Prime Minister, to create a big difference and a game changer in port tourism in Jamaica. I'm excited about that prospect because I see where, for us, it can be a win-win. Because more of the resources of Jamaica can now be utilized by cruises all across the world. They want our workers, and Minister Montague has been working along with Minister of Labour on a strategy to ensure that more of the Jamaican workers can be recruited. As a matter of fact, there is one cruise line that wants 10,000 Jamaican workers, and all of that is very important in terms, and we're getting there soon. These are critical areas, Mr. Speaker, but the Caribbean as a whole, being the largest and most important cruise destination in the entire world, must leverage its position to get more from cruise. And Jamaica is importantly placed to assist in that regard. Mr. Speaker, the tourism development, we spoke about reimagining tourism. We spoke about looking at new destinations within Destination Jamaica, and under the instruction of our Prime Minister, who himself is a driver in the tourism business, and you'll be surprised how much he pushes me. And he recognized that Jamaica has further potential to establish new destinations within our country. And he gave us instruction to look at St. Thomas as a possible new destination. And the work has been done, Mr. Speaker, and I'm proud to present the report that is before this House for the establishment of this new destination. Mr. Speaker, the beach program, it continues apace. COVID or no COVID, the Jamaican people are entitled to full use of the beaches of our country, and the program will continue. We have, Mr. Speaker, over 13 public beaches across Jamaica to be rehabilitated in this budget year. Mr. Speaker, we are proud of the work that is going on in improving the quality of beach experience in Montego Bay, and to create indeed a new attraction. An attraction that will change the face of Montego Bay as a tourism destination. And we have worked with the UDC in building out the Cross Harbor Beach Park, $1.3 billion, a state-of-the-art beach facility for the people of Montego Bay, for the people of Jamaica first, and then for tourists who come afterwards. We are pleased, Mr. Speaker, to indicate that later this year, hopefully in the last quarter of this year, we could have the benefit of opening and enjoying that facility. Mr. Speaker, we are excited about the prospects of now looking at new market areas, but I want to say very little on that at this time, simply because we will have to do a number of pivoting and re-engineering as we look at the state of the markets and the readiness for them to receive our efforts and our activities. So we are looking at that, but South America remains for us the new market to drive into, and we are also looking, Mr. Speaker, at how to access some of the far destinations such as Japan and the Eastern Bloc. Mr. Speaker, workers' housing represents an important final step in our strategy towards the human capital development. And Jamaica knows that this is perhaps one of the most critical areas of neglect where the tourism worker is concerned. And in our time, Mr. Speaker, if you recall from 2010, we started this initiative about providing support for tourism workers' housing. And $1 billion was earmarked at the time.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the member be allowed to speak until he has completed his...
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Those in favor? Aye. All against?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the leader of the House for that very generous resolution. So, Mr. Speaker, $1 billion Jamaican dollars was earmarked then for the development of shelter and housing solutions for tourism workers across Jamaica. Out of that, Mr. Speaker, a number of communities benefited. Flankers, Lilliput, Norwood, in Negril, the community escapes me, but definitely Negril, and also in St. Anne. Dr. Chang, you were the minister that actually implemented that. No, no, man, in Negril, yes. Whitehall. And Whitehall was developed in that, and the continuation of that. But, Mr. Speaker, I don't want to throw stones because, you know, that's not the nature of how I operate. No. But the truth is that the program stopped. It never moved 1 inch. While I was on sabbatical for 4 years, the program also went on sabbatical. But, Mr. Speaker, the good news is that on return from sabbatical, we revived the program. And I'm proud to tell you that so far, Mr. Speaker, we are on track now to complete rehabilitation of a community that has 350 households. And we have purchased a property over in Wright Park, which is now providing 750 units that are available and will be, available by next year to the workers of the tourism industry. In addition, Mr. Speaker, there's another facility that is under discussion with possible partnership to provide another 1,200 houses for the workers of the tourism industry. Mr. Speaker, we have on track to finish the Negril project, and Mr. Speaker, we hope that because things will turn around under the good leadership of our Minister of Finance, that in 2021-22, we will be able to continue this program into other communities across Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, we are committed to the whole process of reimagining the industry. And this is a period, Mr. Speaker, when a lot of thinking has to go into it. We have to learn to be agile, to be adaptive, and to pivot. And so work is being done, Mr. Speaker, to develop a tourism strategy and action plan. And that, Mr. Speaker, is being coordinated and supported by the Inter-American Development Bank. And the plan will update a current sustainable master plan that was established in 2002, and, Mr. Speaker, to strengthen the elements and components of our Vision 2030 plan. It will provide a framework to guide the development of the tourism sector up to 2030, incorporating the new realities of the industry. The tourism strategy and action plan will focus on the competitiveness of a sector, especially in relation to information technology and the internet, and the resilience of the sector, which, Mr. Speaker, is a major platform on which our redevelopment strategies are going to be predicated. Mr. Speaker, we are excited about the fact that Jamaica continues to offer thought leadership in global tourism, and to the fact that, Mr. Speaker, we, as Little Jamaica, led the world in understanding that with and post-COVID is going to create a new type of traveler. A traveler that we are dubbing Generation C, Generation COVID. A type of traveler that is going to be focused on health and health security arrangements and destination assurance. A type of traveler that is going to be concerned with social issues in relation to social distancing and tourism ethics. A type of traveler that is going to be focused on a new transportation arrangement structured in a manner that will reduce density and allow for them to be able to move freely but safely. A new traveler, Mr. Speaker, who is going to be concerned about COVID security equipment and their presence in destinations. A new type of traveler who are going to be measuring what we in Jamaica is now defining through the Global Tourism and Resilience Crisis Management Center, a resilience barometer. To establish, Mr. Speaker, a COVID resilience barometer that will measure the level of resilience of destinations towards COVID. So, Mr. Speaker, we are doing that, and tomorrow we have a special lecture at the University of the West Indies put on by the Global Resilience and Crisis Management Center, which incidentally, just to remind you, is our creation. Jamaica gave that to the world, and the world has embraced it. The satellite centers exist now in Kenya, in Nepal, and we just got a call yesterday from Saudi Arabia wanting to establish a satellite center there in Saudi Arabia. Mr. Speaker, we are excited about the prospects of collaborating also with JCIF in the implementation of a special rural economic development initiative called READY. There was already one which focused on small farmers in the tourism sector. And this READY 2 will take a broader look, not just on small farmers now, but on small entrepreneurs, so that we can develop capacity within the industry to deal with, and I keep saying, the 80% of tourism that is driven by the small and medium enterprises. A lot of people don't know, Mr. Speaker, that 80% of tourism worldwide is driven by small people, little people. But the anomaly is that 80% of the returns from tourism go to the 20%. We want to change that. And Jamaica led the way because we had the discussion and we set up a world meeting here in Montego Bay in the January of 2019 and brought President Uribe to be the guest speaker with the World Bank and IDB to discuss that asymmetry that exists and how we can rebalance tourism in favor of the 80% who are the small people of the industry. And so we are very proud to share with the World Bank in this particular initiative with READY, because it is part of that strategy to bring more of the small people into the mainstream of tourism to benefit from the returns of tourism. Mr. Speaker, we are committed to continuing to make tourism not just become a factor for economics, but a driver of human development. And we are excited about the prospects of using this period to rethink as we stop, we look, and we listen. Mr. Speaker, there is no question that tourism has been hard hit, and there is no question, Mr. Speaker, that we have had the strength to indicate to the world that tourism has the capacity to bounce back. And that example is shown in the last 50 years when we had SARS that hit tourism hard and it bounced back and grew. Then we had 9/11, which hit tourism hard and it bounced back and grew. Then we had the World Economic Recession in 2008-9 that hit tourism hard and it bounced back and grew. Now we have something we've never seen before, COVID-19, that is hitting us. But I'm telling you today that the resilience of tourism will go through this period, manage, recover, and thrive afterwards. The strategies that we have put forward here, Mr. Speaker, are designed to do just that, to ensure that we manage, that we measure, that we recover, but most importantly, that we thrive in Jamaica and continue to make tourism the bastion for prosperity in Jamaica. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure we all can agree that that was an excellent presentation. Well constructed and well delivered and full of content. Thank you, Minister. Minister, would you please? Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, our next speaker will be the Minister of Justice and Justice. But I'm going to make a special appeal to our members to remain in the chamber while the opposition spokesman on agriculture makes his presentation following Minister Chuck. It's a special appeal that I'm going to make to our membership so that he is accommodated by our presence.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Chuck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I feel especially privileged to report the achievements of the Justice Ministry, as well as to present our plans for even more achievements and improvements in the years ahead. I am particularly privileged to appear in this honourable House on behalf of the constituents of North East St. Andrew and will continue to serve them diligently and steadfastly. I give thanks to my two councillors, Deputy Mayor Winston Ennis and Councillor Joy Cottrell, and the hard-working team in the constituency who serve North East St. Andrew well. Mr. Speaker, I express my heartfelt appreciation to the Prime Minister, the Most Honourable Andrew Holness, for his confidence in my ability to reform the justice sector. I also acknowledge my hard-working team at the Ministry of Justice, capably led by the Permanent Secretary, Mrs. Sansia Bennett Templar, for their commitment to delivering justice services to our citizens and for quickly adjusting our operations so that we could continue to serve our people during the recent COVID-19 pandemic. I extend in particular, Mr. Speaker, my gratitude to the Chief Justice, the Honourable Mr. Justice Brian Sykes, other members of the judiciary, as well as their support staff for working so ardently to improve court service delivery to our citizens. Certainly, Mr. Speaker, his visionary leadership has put Jamaica's court system on the trajectory to become the best in the Caribbean and one of the best in the world. The Ministry of Justice will support the judiciary and the court system fully as we journey towards a first-class justice system. I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, to the President of the Court of Appeal, the Honourable Mr. Justice C. Dennis Morrison, appeal judges of the Court of Appeal and their staff, the Attorney General, Mrs. Malahu Fort, who is with me here, Malahu Fort, the Solicitor General, Mrs. Marlene Aldred, and the staff of the Attorney General's Chambers, the Director of Public Prosecutions, Mrs. Paula Llewellyn, and her staff, the Director, Court Administration Division, Mrs. Tricia Cameron Anglin, and her staff, for their sterling contribution to the advancement of the work of the courts and the justice system. Mr. Speaker, the justice team comprises not just divisions at Central Ministry, but also affiliated agencies, all of which contributed to the overall achievements for the last fiscal year. Special thanks, Mr. Speaker, to the Executive Director, Legal Aid Council, Mr. Hugh Faulkner, and his staff for ensuring that citizens can secure legal representation, the Director of Victim Services Division, Reverend Osborne Bailey, and his team for providing critical interventions for victims of crime, the Administrator General, Mrs. Lona Brown, and her staff for protecting the interests of minors, creditors, and beneficiaries of estates, the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, Ms. Judith Grant, and the Director of Legal Reform, Mr. Maurice Bailey, and their staff for contributing to the development of a robust legislative framework.
Also, Mr. Speaker, to the custodies, the Lay Magistrate Association of Jamaica, and the thousands of JPs who give volunteer service to this nation. Mr. Speaker, we have made great strides to ensure that each citizen can access the justice system effectively and easily. This is made possible through the kind support of our local and international partners who made critical strategic investments to build the capacity of justice sector stakeholders and justice sector infrastructure. They provided us with some of the necessary tools and budgetary support to bolster our efforts. The European Union delegation to Jamaica, Ambassador Wazaliska, the Global Affairs of Canada, High Commissioner Laura Peters, the United States Agency for International Development, the United Nations Children's Fund, the Department for International Development, the Inter-American Development Bank, the International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Section in the U.S. Embassy, the National Integrity Action. I say thank you for your support. I'm also grateful, Mr. Speaker, for the support of my close protection officer, Sergeant Howard Hamilton, and my driver, Mr. O'Neill Ennis, as I execute my duties. I express my sincere gratitude to my wife, Patricia, and our family for standing with me all these years as I carry out my duties as a Cabinet Minister and Member of Parliament. Sincere thanks to all of you. I also thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the staff of the House of Parliament for the support and friendship we have enjoyed here in the House of Parliament. Exactly. Mr. Speaker, I open my presentation today with a report on the courts. The Ministry of Justice has put its full support behind the judiciary as it works towards building public trust and confidence and improving service delivery in the courts. We are seeing significant progress in this regard, with the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal, and the parish courts all recording notable successes in different areas of operation. Still, Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the progress that has been made, so much more needs to be done. Mr. Speaker, I have been very strident on the matter of long delays in handing down judgments. This is an issue which the Chief Justice himself has addressed, admonishing judges that in short order, all judgments should be delivered within 90 days of completion of the case, or within 180 days in exceptional circumstances. Mr. Speaker, in the Court of Appeal, as of June 16, 2020, this year, there are 69 outstanding reserved judgments and 30 outstanding reasons for judgment. 65.18% of all matters disposed of by the court were disposed of within 6 months. Quite commendable. And there was a 37.86% increase in the number of appeals disposed of in 2019. However, Mr. Speaker, at the end of 2019, there were still over 30 reserved judgments, which were over 2 years waiting to be delivered. In the Supreme Court, Mr. Speaker, they recorded an impressive increase of 120% in the number of judgments delivered in 2019 over those in 2018. During 2019, for every 100 judgments reserved, 189 was delivered. Quite commendable. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, from January to May this year, 2020, the court delivered 97 judgments and reserved 42, leading to a judgments clearance rate of 231%. However, Mr. Speaker, in the Supreme Court, 50% of reserved judgments are over 2 years delayed. In the parish courts, Mr. Speaker, the case clearance rate for 2019, that is the number of cases disposed of for every 100 cases entering the courts, was 101.6%, an increase of 7.29% over 2018. All 13 parish courts exceeded the international benchmark of 85%. The data for the past 36 months, from September 2016 to December 2019, show overall 41.11% of all cases in the parish courts are disposed of within 90 days of entry into the courts. Mr. Speaker, despite these results, it is clear that there still exists an unacceptably long delay in setting trial dates and delivering judgments. We are seeing where cases that have been filed and are ready for trial in the Supreme Court are now being set for 2025 and 2026. Such inordinate delays do not reflect timely disposal of cases. It is a matter, Mr. Speaker, that needs to be addressed. In the Supreme Court, matters that do not require adjudication should be completed within 12 months. If the case needs to go to trial, they should realistically be completed within 2 years on average. From filing to completion should not be longer than 3 years. In the parish courts, matters should be completed within 24 months, with 18 months being a realistic average. Mr. Speaker, that is the benchmark of a first-class justice system. It is the time period, Mr. Speaker, as a matter of policy that we hope that the courts can achieve. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, this is a far cry from what is happening now. And, Mr. Speaker, we need to do something about it. Litigants have their lives on hold and are, frustratingly, waiting years to have their cases scheduled and tried. And then after they're tried, Mr. Speaker, they wait 2 years for the judgment. That cannot make sense, Mr. Speaker, and it is something that I have addressed. I am in touch with the courts, and it's something that must be dealt with. The Chief Justice has underscored repeatedly, more judgments should be delivered orally, and judgments should be reserved only for really complex cases. If a written judgment is required, the decision should first be given orally and followed up within 3 to 6 months with a written explanation. Mr. Speaker, that is the benchmark of a first-class justice system. Litigants and their attorneys are complaining bitterly about the delays in the justice system. And sadly, Mr. Speaker, they have directed their wrath at the Justice Minister and the Justice Ministry without appreciating that the Justice Minister has absolutely no control or authority over the judges. Mr. Speaker, this Minister of Justice respects the separation of powers and has never, cannot, and will not interfere with the judiciary in their judicial role. However, Mr. Speaker, the prolonged delay in the court system is a matter of public concern that cannot be ignored. The ministry is prepared to assist and respond to the judiciary and the court system in any strategy that will support the timely disposal of cases. As a matter of policy, the ministry is required to provide the resources, and we're doing that. The judiciary asked for additional judicial clerks to assist in writing judgments. We provided an additional 10, making a total of 22 in the Supreme Court. Further, the Court of Appeal has 11 senior judicial clerks. Last year, Mr. Speaker, we fixed up the Court of Appeal, and they appointed 3 additional judges, which increased the number to 10. As a result, Mr. Speaker, the Court of Appeal disposed of 193 appeals, representing an increase of over 20% in the clearance of appeals delivered over 2018. But still, Mr. Speaker, the Court of Appeal has 1,800 appeals, 1,800 appeals pending, of which just about 1,000 they're waiting on the transcript. But they have approximately 800 cases ready to be heard. we expect the Court of Appeal, Mr. Speaker, to appoint the 3 additional judges for a total of 12 appeal judges plus the President, so that they can sit regularly in 3 panels per week to deal with these pending cases. The Minister of Justice, Mr. Speaker, is therefore sending a very clear signal and urging the courts that the public that we serve deserves fair, timely, and efficient resolution of cases. Because, Mr. Speaker, that is the benchmark of a first-class justice system. And, Mr. Speaker, we will go to full way to provide the necessary resources. We are providing the technology, Mr. Speaker, to assist in the administration of the courts. And this Friday, in the St. Catherine Spanish Town Parish Court, we will be formally handing over the audiovisual technology in all 78 courts, in the parish courts and the Supreme Court, to enable matters to be dealt with technology. There's still some fine-tuning, yes, but most of the courts are now ready to engage in the technology, so that matters such as case flow, management, case scheduling, digital recording to expedite production of transcript and integration with audio-visual recording. And, Mr. Speaker, we have also commissioned into service video link capabilities to alleviate the need and cost to transport remandees from the jails, from the prisons to the courts. This facility was used during COVID in the recent past to hold bail hearings electronically and conduct other urgent court and chamber matters. And, Mr. Speaker, we have 2 buses that we are going to commission into service, 2 Toyota Coaster buses. We are going to configure them with audio-visual equipment so that vulnerable witnesses, children, witnesses who don't want to be facing the accused in court, they can sit in the bus at some remote location, give their evidence, see what is happening in court, and the court can see that witness in the coaster bus. Mr. Speaker, technology will be installed in the courts because that is one strategy we believe that can help in expediting the disposal of cases. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, in February this year, the Justice Ministry, in association with the Court Administration Division and NIA, held a national conference on technology in the justice sector, where local and international experts discussed the development of a strategic framework for the digitalization of Jamaica's justice system. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, this increase in the use of technology in judicial matters sets us well on our way to become one of the best justice systems in the world. The country can expect to see further advances in this regard in the coming years. But, Mr. Speaker, the truth of the matter is that we have to find alternative strategies to deal with conflicts, disputes, and to settle matters in Jamaica. And we are promoting alternative dispute resolution, methods such as mediation and restorative justice, to resolve problems even before they get to the courts. But when they get to the courts, we are urging lawyers, judges, other stakeholders to refer matters to be settled by ADR, Alternative Dispute Resolution, to assist in reducing the backlog. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, our restorative justice program contributed significantly to the decrease in the number of cases now being dealt with in the parish courts, as those can be resolved without litigation are increasingly being referred to the justice centers across the island. The rate of reduction over the past 12 months has been particularly strong, with an average monthly reduction of 9.26% in the case backlog. A priority of the Ministry's ADR agenda, therefore, has been to put in place the framework needed to support a gamut of services to establish restorative justice as a standard feature of the Jamaica justice system. Mr. Speaker, last year I stood here and committed to providing training for school administrators, justices of the peace, clergy, and security personnel. I am proud to report that all our ADR training objectives have been achieved. We trained 619 police officers, probation officers, and school administrators. We held 290 sensitization sessions. Over 7,000 Jamaicans benefited from restorative justice processes. In the 2019-20 fiscal year, we facilitated 1,600 cases with 9,000 participants. An impressive 90% of the interventions had successful outcomes, representing a 42.2% increase over the previous year. We currently, Mr. Speaker, have 16 restorative justice centers. That is at least one in every parish. Through these offices, we guide victims and offenders towards peaceful conflict resolution and healing in communities. Honourable members, all across Jamaica, restorative justice interventions are changing angry blows into handshakes and verbal conflict into amicable discourse, one restorative justice conference at a time. The position, Mr. Speaker, is when matters are referred to the RJ centers, the alleged victim, the alleged offender, they get in a conference, in a circle, and they're guided by the restorative justice facilitators, and they share their concerns, and before you know it, after a period of time, they start to shake hands. And these restorative justice facilitation, Mr. Speaker, are a major source of conflict resolution in communities right across Jamaica, and we shall be promoting them even more because they form the strategy and backbone by which we can have a kinder and gentler society. Mr. Speaker, mediation is a major strategy to solve disputes. And I'm only a little disappointed that more matters are not being referred to mediation. The Ministry of Justice is in the process of training hundreds, perhaps a couple thousand mediators, because we feel that in the communities, matters in the courts, and even international mediation, because we adopted the Singapore Convention on Mediation last year. All of these, Mr. Speaker, will go a far way to resolving matters in the courts and in our communities. And Jamaica, like Singapore, can become a center for settling disputes. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, in short order, to bring a mediation bill to Parliament. Mr. Speaker, I am of the firm view that a nation is judged by how it treats the vulnerable groups in our society, such as the elderly and the young. In this regard, I will highlight some of the work done by the Justice Ministry to address their needs. Honourable members will be well aware that from time to time children come before the courts, having been in conflict with the law. Our responsibility as a government is to ensure that these children are able to survive and thrive. We expended a lot of human and other resources on the National Child Diversion Program, which provides alternatives for young offenders under 17 years old. During the 2019-2020 fiscal year, the Justice Ministry focused on initiatives to implement the Child Diversion Act 2018. And after years of research, development, training and sensitization, drafting of legislation and mobilizing of personnel, I am happy to report to this Honourable House that the Child Diversion Act was brought into full effect in December 2019. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, the Justice Ministry is proud to report on the progress we have made on the implementation of the National Child Diversion Program. The establishment of 12 child diversion parish offices achieved. The appointment of core staff for the child diversion program achieved. The selection of 13 child diversion parish committees achieved. The engagement of NGOs and CBOs to bridge the gap between communities and the programs achieved. Training of mentors to bolster the work of the child diversion program achieved. The execution of a national education campaign for the sensitization of all stakeholders achieved. Mr. Speaker, the achievement of these objectives brought child diversion to the cusp of a full all-island rollout by March 2020. Unfortunately, the reduction of court activities and other COVID-19 related factors hampered the pace of operationalization. By March 2020, with child diversion offices operational in 13 parishes, 22 children had been referred to the program. Mr. Speaker, the Child Diversion Act is designed to deal with children who committed specific offences, all of which are set out in the Child Diversion Act 2018. With respect to children deemed uncontrollable, the Child Diversion Act does not make provisions for children deemed uncontrollable, as this is not a charged or criminal offence. However, another unit of the Justice Ministry, the Legal Aid Council, provides legal assistance in these cases. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, absolutely important, the Legal Aid Council has been performing significantly and has done yeoman service across Jamaica. Not only have they provided representation for 5,301 individuals, but Mr. Speaker, last year we got 2 additional buses from the Canadian High Commission and the United Nations Development Program. And these 2 mobile units, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that all 3 can serve every single community across Jamaica, that every single person that needs legal assistance. Because, Mr. Speaker, legal assistance must not only be available to the rich and privileged. Every single Jamaican of whatever means, however small, must be able to call on the state to get information, to get knowledge on how to access and to protect their rights, to protect their freedoms, and to be able to settle matters when they get into dispute. And Mr. Speaker, the Legal Aid Council, the Legal Aid Unit of the Ministry, has been doing yeoman service to ensure that the vulnerable, the poor in communities, that they get access to legal service. Mr. Speaker, and I encourage members to book these mobile units, hopefully soon after the pandemic crisis, so that these buses can visit their communities and assist your constituents who may need legal information. These buses, Mr. Speaker, are state-of-the-art and retrofitted for the comfort and privacy of the clients and the lawyer. And Mr. Speaker, just in fact recently, we have so put in and provided necessary protection so that the legal team can go into the communities even now with personal protection equipment, with masks, and they have been going into the communities and ensuring that the clients who come in wear a mask. So even in this pandemic crisis, they have been going and doing their work. So, Mr. Speaker, there's a monthly schedule, and communities across Jamaica can always call and invite the mobile bus, to visit. And I say thanks to the Canadian government and the United Nations Development Program for assisting in this regard. Mr. Speaker, a lesser known activity of the ministry is the Victim Service Division, because it's not broadcasted. The truth of the matter is that when victims are hurt, oftentimes it is the probation officer or the court that refer these victims to the Victim Services Division, and these victims get counseling and also assistance as much as possible to overcome the really threatening and also humiliating aspects of criminal activity. And so counseling is provided, Mr. Speaker, and sometimes they're referred to centers to recuperate, and we do as much as possible to assist the victims of crime. And the children are the ones who oftentimes need our assistance, and during the course of the last fiscal year, 4,244 children got assistance through the court support and also for trauma and grief therapy and special intervention programs. And we assisted 533 adults, Mr. Speaker. And also we give as much counseling as possibly can. In fact, we had 13,057 counseling sessions in the past year, during which we engaged 5,861 new clients and supported 6,796 follow-up clients. Mr. Speaker, the value to the nation of emotional healing on this scale is incalculable. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Justice is responsible for a very important activity, expungement. Expungement, Mr. Speaker, is limited. It is limited to persons who have committed less serious offenses. So major offenses are excluded. But many of these persons who are convicted, Mr. Speaker, they have served their time. Many have returned to the community and are making valuable contributions. Many of them were convicted when they were teenagers. Many of them in their 20s and 30s. Now would like to travel, to become security officers, to go on farm work programs, but they are being prohibited because of some less than serious offense. And the ministry has been very successful in expunging during the course of last year, 576 from 1382 applications. The truth, Mr. Speaker and members, is that a number of offenses are not expungible. Many persons who have committed fairly serious offenses, I'm not denying, but they have served their time, be it 5 years, 10 years. They have returned to the communities, and they live straight life. Many have become pastors. Many would like to become teachers, or their families are the ones who write the minister letters of appeal, pleading. But my hands are tied because the third schedule of the Act prevents me from expunging. The truth, Mr. Speaker, is that I will be coming to Parliament with a bill to allow the expungement committee, in cases where all the inquiries have been done, and to show that the man, having served his prison sentence, he has lived a decent, civilized, crime-free life for 15, 20 years, whatever the case, we can expunge his record so that he can turn over a new chapter in his life. I was hoping, Mr. Speaker, it would have come already. The cabinet submission has been drafted, but we are sending it to all the different agencies, the Ministry of National Security, the Foreign Affairs Ministry, the Attorney General's chambers, so that we can actually bring the law here and change it for the benefit of thousands of persons who have served their time, have reformed, and would like to turn a new page. Mr. Speaker, the processing of ministers' marriage licenses is another one where, especially for the tourists who come to Jamaica and seek a marriage license, Member of Parliament from Eastern St. James, that last year 8,645 marriage licenses were actually provided. 38.7 million just for license. And apart from the fact that they do themselves spend a lot of money for the marriages. Mr. Speaker, having regard to the invaluable work done by the Justices of the Peace across the island, the Justice Ministry invested heavily in capacity building for them to ensure they remain current with national and international standards of service. We held several mass training sessions across the island throughout the past year, with several hundred JPs attending each sitting. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the NIA, the European Union delegation in Jamaica, the USAID, the Dispute Resolution Foundation, as well as several other government agencies who assisted in the training of our JPs. In addition, Mr. Speaker, 600 JPs were steeped in mediation, restorative justice, and child diversion procedures. 36 JPs who successfully completed the mediation training offered by the Justice Training Institute and are now certified and gazetted to serve as mediator at the parish court level, and an additional 14 JPs await certification and gazetting. Mr. Speaker, 254 justice personnel benefited from special residential training. 717 justices of the peace participated in specialized training sessions. Mr. Speaker, 51 members of the court staff also participated in training on increasing access to justice. And during the course of last year, Mr. Speaker, we commissioned 783 new JPs during the past year, representing a 37% increase over those commissioned in 2018-2019. Mr. Speaker, I thank citizens of Jamaica for their overwhelming response to the call to serve. Mr. Speaker, the fact that so many Jamaicans are able to meet the stringent requirements to be a justice of the peace speaks volumes about our society's potential. To date, Mr. Speaker, we have over 9,047 JPs island-wide. This, Mr. Speaker, is an almost 50% increase during my current tenure as Minister. And Mr. Speaker, we want more persons of unquestionable integrity to serve as JPs, and we look forward to receiving even more applications so that we will have a strong core of leaders to offset the diseases or virus of indiscipline, crime and violence now plaguing our society. Mr. Speaker, the Ministry has spent an enormous amount of money over the last 3 or 4 years to ensure that the justice infrastructure is improved, and certainly in the last couple of years, you rarely hear of court breaking down, because we ensure, Mr. Speaker, that the infrastructure is repaired, improved, and we will continue to do so. Last year, Mr. Speaker, we spent over $1 billion, and we are retrofitting many judicial facilities, and we also, I can report, we have bought land in Manchester to have the Manchester Regional Judicial Complex. And Mr. Speaker, as we speak, we're spending an enormous amount of money to improve and engage in major renovation of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions at Public Building West. Mr. Speaker, we continue to spend significant sums of money to improve various parish courts. And I can say, Mr. Speaker, even Clarendon, we will be spending, we hope that the Maypen courthouse, which the member from Central Manchester has been asking about repeatedly, but we hope in due course, in Central Clarendon, we hope in due course that that will be fixed to improve the general ambience of that Maypen Parish Court. We hope that will start soon, Member of Parliament. Mr. Speaker, there are also other areas that have done stellar work. The Administrator General's Department marked 20 years as an agency in 2019 under the leadership of Administrator General Mrs. Lona Brown. The Administrator General Department continued to proficiently administer the estate of persons who have died intestate or left minors. In the last fiscal year, the Administrator General Department closed 520 estate cases, transferred properties and funds to the relevant beneficiaries. During the same period, over $600 million was paid out to beneficiaries. The Administrator General Department also surpassed its stellar record for issuing instruments of administration, with 293 instruments of administration issued, surpassing the average of 250 issued in the previous years. That is success, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution is mandated to support the Justice Ministry vision to provide the citizens of Jamaica with a prosecutorial system which respects their rights and safeguards the administration of justice. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, the Office of the DPP continues to be heard by the people of Jamaica as a voice which is both fair and just in matters of criminal prosecution. As earlier indicated, work is advanced in the renovation and expansion of the ODPP, which will be completed shortly in the 2020-21 fiscal year. This will allow, Mr. Speaker, for even further efficiencies in their operations. In the year under consideration, over 2,600 cases were disposed of across the various circuits and gun courts. This is an average, Mr. Speaker, of 216 cases per month. Notably, there was a 30% increase in case files disposed of in the rural circuit courts and a 20% increase in case files disposed of in the home circuit court. Mr. Speaker, the DPP and our team must be commended for the excellent role they play in the administration of justice. Mr. Speaker, the Office of the Parliamentary Counsel is doing exceptional work. For the financial year 2019-2020, the OPC dispatched approximately 620 of the 634 matters on which government ministries, departments and agencies requested its assistance. This represents, Mr. Speaker, an increase of 70% when compared with the same period last year. Mr. Speaker, several matters were disposed of and they continue to be dealt with in a very expeditious manner. Mr. Speaker, looking forward, the team at the Justice Ministry works assiduously to meet the needs of the public despite the necessary restrictions of the COVID-19 era. The operations of all our teams have been adjusted so that while they keep within the guidelines outlined by the government, we continue to meet the diverse needs of a citizenry that demands and deserves professional and expert service delivery. The Justice Training Institute is offering an increased suite of trainings via webinars. We are hosting our town hall meetings digitally instead of having mass gatherings at public fairs. The Victim Service Division now offers counseling via telephone. The number of participants allowed for restorative justice conferences have been adjusted to comply with physical distancing protocols. The Legal Aid Council mobile justice units, as I pointed out, now have strict operating procedures for sanitation, crowd control, and face-to-face interactions. All this, Mr. Speaker, without compromise to quality and effectiveness. Mr. Speaker, based on last year's result, I am convinced that the strategies we have been employing in the area of dispute resolution, alternative dispute resolution, have been yielding results for the people of Jamaica. Child diversion, the Victim Services Division, and restorative justice are all programs which treat with not just the symptoms, but also the root causes of antisocial behavior. We will continue to take steps, Mr. Speaker, to employ mediation as one of the formal tenets of the ADR suite of offerings in Jamaica. Child diversion will be expanded. Restorative justice will be expanded. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to train more restorative justice practitioners across Jamaica so that they can do the conflict resolution and even more than they are doing now. Mr. Speaker, victim support will be further boosted and more counseling will be provided to the existing clients and new clients. In infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, Over the course of the next 2 fiscal years, the Ministry of Justice will undertake work to implement an expansive program of court infrastructure development that will see the further significant transformation of the justice infrastructure in Jamaica. We intend to provide first-class infrastructure so that our citizens can rest assured that their dignity is being preserved, and other court users, as well as our court staff, can operate in an atmosphere conducive to productivity and well-being. Members, we're indeed journeying towards a first-class justice system, parish by parish. In Manchester, we will restore the historic parish court building which was damaged by fire in November 2019, which will be utilized as an interim family court while a new family court is developed. In Trelawny, we will complete the expansion of the family court to improve services and efficiencies and ensure enhanced accessibility and convenience for users. In Clarendon, St. Andrew, and Hanover, we will deliver 3 new justice centres which will offer combined child diversion and restorative justice services. In St. James, the parish court will undergo extensive renovations and for refurbishing. In Kingston, we will continue to refurbish the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, allowing for improved efficiencies and working conditions. In St. Anne, we will deliver a standalone, purpose-built family court comprising 8,800 square feet.
Mr. Speaker, I am of the opinion that the member will not need very long, so we ask that he be allowed to speak until he's completed his presentation.
Those in favour? Aye. Those against? Mr. Chuck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the members for allowing me to complete. This family court in St. Anne, Mr. Speaker, will incorporate child-friendly waiting areas, a separate holding area for children in state custody, well-appointed, comfortable waiting rooms, and modern amenities throughout the complex, state-of-the-art information technology systems, including a customer service software, so persons will no longer be called by name to conduct business, but by number. In St. James, St. Anne, and Manchester, we are at varying stages in the process to provide 3 regional judicial complexes. In the case of Manchester and St. Anne, land has already been acquired, and in St. James we are actively looking for a suitable location. The Ministry has completed consultations with the judiciary and are ready to proceed to procurement of consultancy services for the design of the Manchester and St. Anne Regional Judicial Complex. And this is not all, Mr. Speaker. The Ministry is far advanced in activities for substantial renovation works, as I mentioned earlier, the Clarendon Parish Court Maypen, and have completed preparatory works for renovation of some 8 additional court facilities, placing us in a state of readiness to quickly proceed with these works and receipt of funding for these projects. Mr. Speaker, the team at the Justice Ministry is working assiduously and purposefully to ensure that the wheels of justice will turn in what we plan to be the gold standard of justice infrastructure. A first-class justice system demands first-class facilities, and they are being provided. Mr. Speaker, our appetite for delivering a first-class justice system has been whetted by the achievements of the past fiscal year. Despite national and global challenges, we remain resolute that our justice service delivery in Jamaica must be the yardstick by which others are measured. Our commitment to the courts of Jamaica is unwavering. The Ministry of Justice will continue to play its part in providing the resources that are needed to make our justice system one of the best in the Caribbean and in the world. The Justice Ministry, Mr. Speaker, recognizes that upholding the rule of law and protecting human rights are linchpins of a democratic state. And through our agencies and divisions, we will continue to respond to the needs of vulnerable groups, regardless of whether those we serve are out and about, as previously obtained, or in the words of a recent popular local song, inside quarantining. Mr. Speaker, I urge all justice stakeholders to join with me and the dedicated staff at the Justice Ministry as we seize the opportunities and resources available for our journey towards a first-class justice system that will be safe, cohesive, and just for Jamaica, land we love. I thank you.
Mr. Speaker, it is fair to say that the Minister of Justice has earned bragging rights, because so far he is the only minister to have brought in his speech within the time allotted, just marginally over, given with a sense of compassion and a sense of commitment to having the job done to deliver justice to the people of Jamaica. Congratulations, Delroy. Mr. Speaker, I now invite you to request of the member from Northern Trelawny and opposition spokesman on agriculture and I believe rural development to make his presentation.
Mr. Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I am indeed very grateful for the opportunity to address this House and by extension the country for the first time in my capacity as the spokesperson on agriculture and rural development. Mr. Speaker, today I will outline that with the right leadership, management and policies, agriculture can be the building block for this country's development. But Mr. Speaker, before I outline on behalf of this Peter Phillips-led Council what it takes to move agriculture and rural development forward, I want to personally say thank you to a few persons that have allowed me the privilege to be here in this capacity. Mr. Speaker, firstly, I must give thanks to the Lord for great health and strength to have me standing here as the Member of Parliament for the great constituency of Trelawny Northern, and to all my constituents that elected me here. Mr. Speaker, special thanks to our workers and stalwarts of the PNP North Trelawny, the executive members, my family, Leader of Opposition, Dr. Peter Phillips, for entrusting me with this portfolio, my office staff, my driver, Mousy, Johan Stevens, my able assistants, members of my task force that continue to provide excellent overview and insight in the sector, and last but not least, to my colleagues in this House on both sides for the mutual respect shown during my time here. Mr. Speaker, this presentation is taking place at a time when our farmers and investors in the sector are rethinking their approaches and remain viable and emerge from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to thank them for their patience, resilience, and commitment to the sector during this period. Mr. Speaker, I want to assure all our sector stakeholders that help is coming and that this PNP administration is resolute in fostering the true environment for growth of the sector with the development and implementation of policies and the enacting of legislation that will finally bring the fruits of the labor to harvest. Mr. Speaker, while I acknowledge the difficulties brought on by COVID-19, the sector was experiencing declines and poor management in critical areas before the onset. A quick glance would see policies in recent times that has removed some of our most productive agricultural lands to housing, and I'll come back to this, Mr. Speaker. Also, we have seen an increase in our food import bill to over $1 billion for the first time in the country's history. We have seen a reduction in the area under irrigation, a weak legislative agenda with no forward thinking nor any investment enabling legislation, abandonment of the self-sufficiency model for crops such as onions and Irish potato, and the lowest export value for traditional export crops in over a decade. These policies, Mr. Speaker, threaten small farmers' investment and by extension, rural livelihood. Let's look at the situation as it obtains in the sector, Mr. Speaker. The agricultural sector has always been an important element for our economic growth and development. In fact, both the IMF and the World Bank have stated that if there is no growth in agriculture, there can be no growth in the economy. In 2019, the sector grew by a mere 0.5%. This compares to 13.5% growth when the current administration took office. Shortly after, there was a precipitous fall in 2017 to minus 3.8, and then a slight improvement in 2018 to 4.2%, by 4.2%. Mr. Speaker, according to Ministry Paper 29 tabled by the Honourable Minister last week, again, it corresponded with the 0.5% growth that I mentioned earlier. Again, Mr. Speaker, this was before COVID. The Minister in the Ministry Paper would want to have us believe that the only explanation for this weak growth was the lack of rainfall. Let me be the first as an agriculturalist to acknowledge that there's a lot of spatial variability that exists within the agricultural sector. But we can't continue to conveniently blame rainfall for all the ills when in 2018, when we had growth, there was less rainfall than in 2017 when there was negative growth. Let me repeat, Mr. Speaker. In 2018, when there was growth, we had less rainfall than in 2017 when there was negative growth. In 2019, the rainfall was only 106 millimeters less than in 2018 when the sector had expanded by 4.2%. Rainfall and spatial variability can't explain the 0.5% pre-COVID growth. Mr. Speaker, there are other reasons for the weak performance pre-COVID, not just drought as the Minister would want the country to believe. But, Mr. Speaker, there are a wide range of other issues that I want to highlight a few very quickly, which involves an overview of the performance of some of the critical sector. Mr. Speaker, in the Ministry Paper tabled last week, the Minister gave the two main policy positions of his ministry as farm road improvement and the production incentive program. Mr. Speaker, those two programs in this year's budget account for just $1 billion in expenditure with no real way to measure the impact. We know how this distribution of the roads has been, Mr. Speaker. My constituency was ground zero, and I'm sure others can attest to it. What actually happened, Mr. Speaker, is that most of these roads were selected and they lead to areas where there are actually no agriculture. How then do you measure fixing a farm road impacting on the improvement of agriculture? Mr. Speaker, another important plan is the advance in the irrigation system. While we continue to have declining yields, the government has failed to inform that they have managed to achieve a decline in the overall area irrigated. Mr. Speaker, provision of irrigation is one way of reducing the unpredictable nature of the sector. Under this government, we have seen the reduction of irrigated areas falling to just 8,747 hectares, despite the higher projections, just over 10,000. Mr. Speaker, this is happening despite significant expenditure at Essex Valley, and we also have projects that are approved for Pedro Plains irrigation system, the South St. Catherine, and the Clarendon agricultural development projects. These are good projects, Mr. Speaker, but the slow pace of implementation, given the importance of irrigation to move us forward, is of grave concern. Mr. Speaker, for instance, let's take a look at the situation at the Bernard Lodge. In recent times, Bernard Lodge area has been in the news for the wrong reasons. Farmers were disgracefully removed from their lands and after much resistance, placed in a flood zone with unproductive semi-saline soils. Mr. Speaker, the area from which the farmers were relocated as some of the most fertile soils in Jamaica and decked with irrigation infrastructure that values over $1 billion. The SCJ holdings has unleashed on these farmers, ravaging their livelihoods and grudgingly providing a space with no irrigation infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, I bring a message to the Minister on behalf of these farmers, with whom we have met, and says, Minister, and it says, Minister, we can't breathe. This policy equates to the government having its knees on the farmers' necks, and they are bawling out, we can't breathe. Mr. Speaker, this opposition is not against housing. We are also for agriculture and the preservation of our urban lands and for the future security of our country. It's ironic, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister in his presentation last week highlighted the fact that COVID-19...
Victor, Mr. Speaker.
No. What are you, Mr.?
I just want to raise a point of order.
He's standing and addressing to you. You have to do something about it.
No, I have.
You're intervening.
Yes, I wanted to. I believe, Mr. Speaker, that 2 other members have spoken today. And I think we gave them the courtesy that is expected. We listened. And I believe that the very minimum is expected for the member who is on his feet. So I'm craving your indulgence.
The Speaker has taken appropriate, in my position, appropriate action, and has asked members to allow the member to speak without disruption. Proceed, Mr. Wright, and I will protect you from the chair. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, my colleague. Mr. Speaker, take for example, the food import bill is another area of concern, Mr. Speaker. This policy of the government has resulted not only in devastation of irrigated lands, but also for the first time in the history of this country, our food import bill has surpassed the US $1 billion mark. There are import increases in most areas, including those that in 2014 we were 90% self-sufficient, and for which we now have to be issuing import permits. Mr. Speaker, take for example the recently released agricultural trade data by Statin. The agricultural data contained within is neither comforting nor reassuring to the nation, and the farming community in particular. Mr. Speaker, the value of our food import bill for the calendar year, was $1.025 billion. To have achieved and surpassed $1 billion United States dollars in agricultural imports is indeed worrying and underscores the opposition concern and repeated call for a national plan to address the myriad of inaccuracies that beset the agricultural sector. The country can no longer contemplate and therefore must demand greater attention for the sector, as the value of the 2019 food imports outstripped that of 2018 by US $116 million, an increase of 12.8%. Mr. Speaker, we take note of the government's assertion that a strategic program has been implemented to support Irish potato production. Mr. Speaker, the irony is that Irish potato has to be imported. Mr. Speaker, another of the government's priority crops for increased local production is onion. And sadly, imports of the crop...
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker. The member gives the impression that Irish potato is just now being imported as if it is something new, when that is not so, Mr. Speaker, and is as such misleading the House in his pronouncements, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this program of self-sufficiency has been in place since 2014. So and the whole import substitution program has been running for over 12 years. So I continue, Mr. Speaker. Is that another of the crop that is onion. Imports of onion, Mr. Speaker, was 9.4 million kilograms in 2019. This represents foreign exchange of 3.6 million of imports, which amounts to over 300 containers of it being imported. It also affects coffee and other crops, Mr. Speaker. The facts, Mr. Speaker, all represents quite the opposite, as the imported weight in the year of containment, and this is in relation to coffee, an increase of 64.59% over 2018 for coffee imports. Mr. Speaker, this betrayal is not only confined to crops, as the livestock sector receives its share of challenges from imports. Pig farmers who are suffering presently from the evaporated hotel market will take no comfort from the fact that in 2019, import of fresh pigtails and pig bellies were valued at almost $1 billion Jamaican dollars. Mr. Speaker, the impending uncertainty of the nation's food and nutrition security, as global food chains are impacted, the emphasis must now be placed on reversing these policies and ensure true self-sufficiency and food security for the country. All these policies, Mr. Speaker, amounts to just talk. But growth is not talk. It requires a firm commitment and focus from this government, which unfortunately has not come while the effects of COVID gradually becoming prominent. Announcement will not happen, Mr. Speaker, but rather the safe and steady hands that is required to move the country forward. Let's take a look at a few of the critical sectors, Mr. Speaker. Milk and milk production. Mr. Speaker, all of us would like to return to the days when Jamaica milk production peaked at 38.8 million litres in 1992. To achieve that, Mr. Speaker, requires an understanding of the milk production and the trading environment. The Economic Growth Council had set a target to achieve 19 million litres of milk produced per year by 2019. We only managed in 2 consecutive years, Mr. Speaker, to produce just over 14 million litres. This is truly disheartening, as in August 2018, we were advised by the Minister that there would be enabling policies to ensure that we become more self-sufficient. These are fair policies, Mr. Speaker, but as again I said, they are lacking in implementation. And that has resulted, Mr. Speaker, in an increase in imports of over 19.3% compared to year on year. Mr. Speaker, I want to just say a few words on the school feeding program. It is an uncontested fact that the nutritional support offered to children in their formative years determines to a large extent the quality of their mental and physical development. We therefore welcome the strident and passionate position taken by the government in January 2019 at the conference center. It was a speech laden with emotional promise to replace the imported genetically modified rice and flour with nutritious locally produced offerings. In prior and subsequent speeches, the Minister extolled the national benefits of using more sweet potato, pumpkin puree, bananas, gluten-free breadfruit, and other locally produced fruits and vegetables in the school feeding program. These are a good direction going forward, Mr. Speaker. However, we hope that the Minister, what he had said, and that he would have been putting it in place and enabling better nutritional offerings to our children, and simultaneously providing increased opportunities for our local farming communities. Importantly, Mr. Speaker, what he said would be done even if it cost a little extra, and that was the word of the Minister. Now, what has happened since? Mr. Speaker, our checks have revealed that the extent of the change in the school feeding program is a redesign, basically, of the recipe. None of the crops which we believe, had the Minister been able to implement his announcement, that would really boost the school feeding program and provide a benefit to the farmers, similarly to what happens with the tourism linkage, it would be very great. But what we have, Mr. Speaker, is a footnote in the annual report of NPL that says that it will be divested, taking control of the country's and the children's food security and nutrition out of the hands of the government, and again, placing it into private hands. Mr. Speaker, it has been over 2 years since the much controversial issue of ownership of the coconut industry board shares in Separate has been removed from what was almost daily discussion. My interest, Mr. Speaker, is not necessarily share ownership, but rather the consensus arising from the deliberations. Recall, Mr. Speaker, it was felt, and I agree, that the greater good for the coconut farmers was the creation of an implementation of a commercial development plan. I listened with great expectation of Minister Shaw's sectoral presentation, and as I am sure all coconut farmers across the country did, for encouraging news on these development plans. Mr. Speaker, coconut farmers today are saddened, as not only was there no update, Minister Shaw failed to show the solidarity with the coconut farmers by even mentioning the word coconut. Mr. Speaker, the coconut farmers are wondering what is happening to the industry. Arising out of the share ownership controversy, Mr. Speaker, we had big talk about the establishment of coconut orchards, a coconut water packaging plant, production of virgin coconut oil, seedbed nurseries, and a cocoa fermentary to support the intercropping of cocoa trees and coconut. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that there is no movement with these plans, and what we have is mere talk. Mr. Speaker, the movement that we are seeing is certainly not in the interest of the coconut farmers, and certainly not in the interest of the country. What we have instead, Mr. Speaker, is a 104% increase in the imports of coconut-related projects in 2019 over 2018. This cannot continue, Mr. Speaker, and we want to urge the Minister to open the discussions and move the sector along. Mango, Mr. Speaker, has been in the news, and it is good that the country has started to export. The comment we want to make on this matter, Mr. Speaker, is that during the period while we are really establishing the orchard, which I know will be happening in Clarendon and Hinswood, a proper analysis of the export value of the product, had it been done, would reveal that we fetch a higher price for mangoes in Canada than we do in the United States. It therefore means that while we are open to new markets and we are happy about that, we also need to maximize on the export value of what our farmers produce. And therefore, we are calling for a proper analysis of the markets to be done. And while we're excited about exporting to our members in the diaspora in the United States, we also have to care about the value of production, the cost of production here, and ensure that our farmers receive a better price. I want to make a few comments, Mr. Speaker, on food security. The signal to manage imports and thereby create opportunities for expanded local production is laudable, and I commend the Minister for giving that signal. Any project, Mr. Speaker, that supports the country's attempt to attain food security is welcomed by this opposition. We pray to the Almighty, Mr. Speaker, that through this program or similar programs, Jamaica will not only increase its availability and nationality to produce nutritious products, but importantly, at competitive and affordable market prices. Mr. Speaker, government investment alone cannot create food security. And quite rightly, the private sector should be encouraged to be a partner until they themselves make a breakthrough through profit acquisitions and can stand on their own. Mr. Speaker, the government has targeted a number of crops for which public financing supports for purchasing of imports attain food security. The expectation, Mr. Speaker, is that governmental productive financing and private sector invitation of investment would conclude a position of greater foreign exchange savings on imports and the country being more food secure, relying less on foreign-grown foodstuff. Mr. Speaker, when we look at the crops targeted for import substitution and analyze their performance in 2019 with 2018, we can only conclude that the program at best is mismanaged. Mr. Speaker, let us first look at the two crops that receive the greatest level of administrative oversight. These crops, Mr. Speaker, are Irish potato and onions. Mr. Speaker, the Irish potato program first started in 2008, as the point of order stated, and at the time of local component of total consumption was 33.5%. Mr. Speaker, the program progressed so well that by 2014 we had reached self-sufficiency level of 90%. Things were moving smoothly until the self-sufficiency levels dropped to 82% in 2018 and 83% in 2019. Mr. Speaker, can you imagine that in 2019, despite the farmers' long and toiled efforts, over 100 containers of Irish potatoes were imported into this country last year? Mr. Speaker, this is mismanagement at its grandest. What is happening to the import substitute program?
Mr. Speaker, a point of order.
Hot pepper.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Again. I don't like what he's saying. Mr. Speaker, I have to interrupt because the member is misleading the House through a lack of understanding, Mr. Speaker. If there is an increase in import, it doesn't mean that there's a decline in production. It may mean that there's an increase in total demand. And what has been happening, as you would have heard, Mr. Speaker, from the presentation by the Minister of Tourism, with all the investment in tourism, there has been, so the misleading the House is the point of order, because the member is giving the impression that there's an increase in import because of a decline in production. Because he says, Mr. Speaker, what the member has said is that the program has been mismanaged while there's an increase in import. He cannot factually prove that and should withdraw.
Mr. Speaker. 1 minute. 1 minute. Order, please. Mr. Green, if the member is misleading the House,
yes, Mr. Speaker,
you have to point out what you describe as misleading.
Yes.
And allow the Speaker to reply.
Thank
not
you.
Mr. Hylton. before Mr. Hylton, please, let Mr.
Mr. Speaker, he is misleading the House by asserting that a mismanagement of the potato program has led to an increase in importation. And I'm saying that is not the case. No. No. It cannot be an opinion like that. There again, Mr. Speaker, he again indicates and suggests that based on how the potato program is handled, he suggests that there is a decline in production, which leads to an increase in import. That is not the case. Mr. Speaker, just to say, that is not the case because potato production has increased year on year.
Mr. Wright, will you comment or clarify, withdraw, or proceed?
Mr. Speaker,
no.
The numbers indicate that the levels are dropped 82% in 2018 and 83% in 2019, and that these numbers came out of the ministry. And it's also tabled in the ministry paper that was tabled by the minister last week. The level of self-sufficiency, that was 90%. The level of self-sufficiency, that was 90%. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, the Minister Green in March also announced in a video that we had enough of each of these crops to last us until September. Our information, Mr. Speaker, is that permits, even though the minister said that we had it until September, permits were issued on the 4th of June for the import of these very same crops. So, Mr. Speaker, these are undisputed. These are undisputed facts. Right.
To make his presentation and
these
to
are
clarify,
undisputed
and
facts,
Mr. Green
Mr. Speaker. These are undisputed facts.
Advise as to whether you are satisfied with your position.
Yes, sir.
No.
Mr. Speaker,
I demand that the member have respect like any other member in this parliament. And if he misleads the House, and it is pointed out to him, he has a right to either withdraw or clarify what he means different
Mr.
from
Speaker,
the member.
I'm giving the clarification.
If there's a correction, you accept the correction and proceed.
Okay, we're moving along, Mr. Speaker.
Is there a correction, Mr. Wright?
No, I gave a clarification, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, Mr. Green, you understand?
what the member needs to be clear, and what it is clear is a total misunderstanding of what he is quoting. What he is quoting, Mr. Speaker, is a percentage of total demand, which simply means that demand has increased. It doesn't mean that production has fallen. That is it, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, Mr. Wright has expressed that he'll accept your correction. Proceed, Mr. Wright.
We have clarified. Mr. Speaker, another of the crop is hot pepper. Mr. Speaker, hot pepper recorded import increases of 55.3% and 65.51% for US dollar value when compared 2018 over 2019. Mr. Speaker, it's for the same reason and the same program why we have had the same program that manages the price for our commodities, Mr. Speaker, the import substitutes program. I would have seen in the Star recently where one commodity that is managed under this program is chicken back. That was recently this week announced that the price was sky high, now selling for $200 per pound. It's the same program, right? So the Star reported it, and that is the price in the market now, because this is something that is managed by the Star. Correction, the Star. Right. Mr. Speaker, and I can pass a copy. I can pass a copy on to the member, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Jackra has been described by farming interests as anti-competitive.
Members,
given the range of regulatory fees associated with production, Mr. Speaker,
do not
it is very difficult to understand what is happening.
The member in his presentation. Go ahead, Mr. Wright.
Mr. Speaker, I want to make a few words on predatory larceny. Mr. Speaker, the largest deterrent to investment in agriculture is the threat posed by predatory larceny. I note the recent push to decentralize the unit in the JCF, but this is not very comforting to the farmers who suffer a significant annual loss as a result. The opposition believes that the lack of an active intelligence-driven surveillance is a major problem, and addressing this would assist in reducing this effect. Resources must be found, Mr. Speaker, to survey active growing areas and strategically place checkpoints and perennial watch notices. Mr. Speaker, RADA must also be strengthened to accurately determine the producers, volumes of production, harvest date, and assist with reinforcement of the receipt book system. This should be done at all levels in our markets, supermarkets, and by all buyers. Mr. Speaker, these measures must be backed by strong legislation and are enforceable, as we cannot have criminal behaving as if they can reap what they did not sow without reaping the rewards of the justice system. Our farmers and investors must be given the level of protection by the state. Mr. Speaker, I want to make a few comments on the sugar industry and SCJ holdings. Mr. Speaker, we have seen the rapid decline of the sugar industry in recent times. Major investors have had to exit after very optimistic takeovers. The opposition acknowledges the difficulties and is aware of the disadvantages brought on by the compliance with the WTO and the removal of preferential prices. But, Mr. Speaker, the current stakeholders must be allowed to continue to produce and supply a right-sized local market. It calls into question the role of the SIA and whether the financing of the SIA by these manufacturers is still relevant given the significantly reduced outputs. The opposition is urging a review of the SIA Act to ensure the current industry players are not overburdened with unnecessary or overhead costs. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, there needs to be tight control at the ports and monitoring to reduce the threat posed by imported sugar and that sometimes finds its way into the trade. Producing the plantation white sugar here is at competitive price can be a way out for manufacturers and end users. Like many other commodities, it is always going to be difficult, but a solution must be found to allow the three factories to operate while satisfying the needs of the end users. Mr. Speaker, the legacy of the once vibrant sugar industry is now vested in SCJ holdings, which has more recently been known for other reasons such as unfair treatment of farmers, no protocols for the sale and distribution of lands, and has totally abandoned one of its main functions for which it was formed, to manage the transition of the sugar industry from public to private. Mr. Speaker, rather than affording the past workers and stakeholders to be cushioned, SCJ Holdings has become the place of employment that is very top-heavy. Mr. Speaker, that small company has 2 senior executives on its payroll with huge salaries. Mr. Speaker, I questioned the minister about this in the Standing Finance Committee in 2018, but no good reason was given for the additions. The taxpayers cannot afford these unwarranted employments, Mr. Speaker, and there needs to be an audit of how the lands under the control of SCJ Holdings are managed and how the revenues from such sales are handled. It cannot be that all we hear is rumblings all over the country of small farmers and other stakeholders being badly treated by the management of SCJ Holdings, and that has abandoned its primary mandate. How can they be selling lands or collecting leases without proper establishment of estate boundaries? Recently, Mr. Speaker, in my constituency this week, there was a third party entity that had gotten lease of lands at a particular price from SCJ Holdings and was subleasing it, giving farmers applications for them to sign without boundaries, without a development plan, to go to the bank and to pay. These kind of unorthodox policies, Mr. Speaker, cannot allow to be continued. And I see my colleague looking at me. It will happen in St. Thomas. It's coming to Clarendon because SCJ Holdings is really doing all that. So I'm calling on the minister, Mr. Speaker, to review the operations of this entity and now the repository of some of the most fertile agricultural lands that will be needed to move agriculture forward, and the unwarranted distribution must stop. Mr. Speaker, we have to do something to ensure that we have more women and children coming into agriculture. Now, Mr. Speaker, I have some suggestions as to how we can respond to COVID and move forward with the sector. I don't want to spend the entire presentation just outlining where we are, but also to say where we could be. Mr. Speaker, I started by giving what we recommended as a national plan. I had revealed aspects of this at the Hague Agricultural Show, to which Minister Green replied very favorably that the plan is on the way. But the events of COVID, Mr. Speaker, has tested and found that the plan itself needs strengthened. And it profits no one if we don't ensure that we have food security. If you recall the 2008 crisis, Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Speaker, I move that the member be allowed to complete his presentation.
Those in favour? Those against? Mr. Wright, proceed.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and thanks, colleague. I'll just go through.
Members, please do not disturb the Speaker. If you have a point, the standing order made provision for you to intervene. Get up like Mr. Green has done, and the member reply. That's a procedure. Go ahead, Mr. Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The opposition is willing to support any good plan by the government that will allow the country to become secure in food. As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, in 2008, the financial crisis ended with a significant shortage of food. While we maneuver our way through this crisis, we must seriously be thinking about food security. We have seen what is happening to chicken back prices, lettuce prices, and other things that we can't always go to imports, and so we therefore need a proper plan. Mr. Speaker, while it is understandable that in the circumstance of a pandemic, marketing channels related to the hotels and restaurants evaporated, other channels can be and should be found. There needs to be quick dialogue, particularly for the farmers in St. Elizabeth, Trelawny, and St. Anne, that will, based on the crop cycles, be coming up with periodic gluts and periodic shortages. So this program needs to be properly managed to ensure that our consumers on the verge of September does not see very much higher prices coinciding with back to school. Mr. Speaker, as global food supply chains are impacted, the international agencies are signaling to national governments the inescapable imperative to manage conditions which ensures the sustenance of their people. A strident call has been made for greater and effective use of science to combat issues that negatively impact the agricultural productive efforts. Mr. Speaker, we could look at research stations such as Bodles, Orange River, Montpellier, and Onslow and see how best they could be a part of the solution to ensure our food security. Mr. Speaker, developing this sustainable plan also warrants a look at our irrigation systems, as rainfall has been so exceedingly unpredictable. And while we applaud the issuing of the tanks and the quarter-acre drip irrigation systems, the level of demand that is going to be required in the next 90 days is of such that based on the crop cycles, you take for instance a good one is lettuce. Lettuce is now at $1,000 per pound. It's a 6-week cycle and it needs a lot of water. If we can put it in now, within 6 weeks, we'll avoid that currently escalating price of lettuce, and therefore we need the irrigation. Mr. Speaker, this national plan should also address the supply source from which the conveyance system irrigates the farmland. I applaud some of the issues taking place now in the St. Catherine Plain, Mr. Speaker, but I wonder if a proper evaluation of the source of water was ever looked into. For many, many, many years, the WRA has not been issuing permits for that basin. It's one aquifer, and that aquifer is an aquifer that oftentimes needs to be recharged by the same irrigation water that supplies the well and the canal systems in St. Catherine. If we're putting housing there, we're going to need water. Developments that are taking place at Hill Run and other places will definitely be impacted if we don't look at increasing the water supply to this zone so that we can mitigate the fallout of a water crisis 10 years from now. Mr. Speaker, for a national agricultural plan to be successful, it has to be supported by trained technocrats and monitoring of specific scientific markers. Therefore, there has to be a greater investment in our research and training facilities. Our schools, the breadbasket of most of them, Case, Elam, Nakalva, needs to be strengthened to ensure that they are sufficiently equipped to test, determine, and predict the spatial variability associated with increased temperatures, that I hear was talking now about climate change, same thing, that affects the maturity period of crops and the availability. Mr. Speaker, these imperatives in a national plan are underscored by the fact that a poorly monitored agriculture sector impacts the struggles in rural areas. Mr. Speaker, the national plan must include accessibility to credit for medium and small farmers. In all our planning to recharge from COVID, I hear the announcement of the $1 billion. We have not seen how it will be spent, but I say, Mr. Speaker, it will take much more than that, given what is happening out there now in the sector. Mr. Speaker, my predecessor in this portfolio, Dr. Ferguson, presented a new deal to this Parliament, aspects of which forms the opposition's position on the national plan. One such is the fast tracking and the delivery of titling to our farmers on developed agricultural lots. This will allow access to capital, security of tenure, and foster long-term investment to these farmers. Mr. Speaker, we need to bolster the cannabis and nutraceutical sectors. The current impasse with the farmers in the cannabis sector is contrary to production, and I'm urging a quick settlement of this matter. Mr. Speaker, this national plan must include an overall approach to how we tackle rural development. We must look at RADA and the way information is disseminated to farmers. Not only do we need more extension officers, but we need them to be equipped and properly prepared to conduct trials, establish demonstration plots based on scientific microclimate of each specific crop in each specific parish constituency or whatever demarcation they use. Mr. Speaker, in closing, the sector is ripe for taking us as a country forward with the right management and approach. It will take more than announcement and short commercials. As a country, we need to focus our attention, and we must invest in our irrigation infrastructure, boost our research capabilities by investing in our institutions and training more technocrats, ensure there is access to financing for our farmers who so desperately needs a push, invest in our training institutions and increase studies for our primary crops and livestock. We must engage and support the private investors and form partnerships that will ensure fruitful partnerships between all stakeholders, including the government. And we must seriously develop, manage, and regulate our cannabis sector. Mr. Speaker, we can do it. We can do it if together we harness the goodwill of our farmers and other players in the sector and translate their ideas into production. This opposition is ready to take the sector and partner with any meaningful idea that will take the country forward. Let's do it for agriculture, and agriculture will do it for Jamaica. Thank you very much.
Mr. Whittam? No. Wait. We have to go back.
Mr. Speaker, I move that for the recommitment of announcements and reports from committees and notices of motions given orally. We have a matter that will be taken by the Deputy House Speaker.
Those in favor? Those against? Announcements.
Also laid on the table of the House today is a copy of the report of the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the Income Tax Employments Amendment Regulations 2020 under the Income Tax Act.
Reports from committees. Mr. Whittle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the report of the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives and its deliberations on the Income Tax Employment Amendment Regulations 2020 under the Income Tax Act.
Notices of motion given orally. Mr. Whittle.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House I will move the following motions. Be it resolved that the report of the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the Income Tax Employment Amendment Regulation 2020 and the Income Tax Act, which was laid on the table of the House on the 24th day of June 2020, be approved. Mr. Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I'll move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take this motion. Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it. Motion approved.
Mr. Speaker, I now move that the motion be approved.
Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it. Motion approved. Mr. Shimura.
Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today, so I ask that the House be adjourned until next week, Tuesday at 2 p.m.
The motion is that the House be now adjourned until next week, Tuesday, the 30th at 2 p.m. Before I put the motion, based on Mr. Wright's presentation today, I would like to ask that members who are making presentation that they are reading, that the Speaker would appreciate getting a copy, like is done by ministers and on this side. Please, so that we can know what the corrections are to be. The motion is for the adjournment. Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it. This Honourable House stands adjourned until next week, Tuesday.
Tourism doesn't exist by itself. Tourism happens only because a whole range of other economic activities are taking place. Having tourism is